The entire conference room froze as Jasmine dropped her cleaning supplies. Mr. Zhang stared in shock, his translator forgotten. Bradley Whitmore turned ghostly pale as his billion-dollar deal collapsed before his eyes. Nobody expected the black housekeeper to speak fluent Mandarin, revealing the devastating truth about the hotel's finances. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed someone being completely underestimated because of their appearance. What would you do if you had a hidden talent that could save hundreds of jobs? Let's find out what happened when one woman's voice finally broke through the silence. Jasmine Johnson stared at the rejection email on her phone screen, the 61st in 18 months since earning her Ph.D. in international business from Columbia University. Despite graduating with honors and speaking 4 languages fluently, her applications to management positions consistently resulted in rejections or worse, complete silence. At 32, with student loan payments mounting and savings dwindling, she had finally accepted the painful reality, facing many overqualified black professionals in Charleston, South Carolina. This morning marked her 3rd month as a housekeeper at the Grand Palmetto Hotel, a 5-star establishment with a storied history and a troubling present. The crisp white uniform she wore felt like a disguise concealing both her education and her growing resentment. Jasmine tucked her phone away and wheeled her cleaning cart toward the executive floor, her movements careful and deliberate. She had learned quickly that invisibility was a survival skill in this environment, especially under the watchful eye of Bradley Whitmore, the hotel's 45-year-old general manager whose disdain for the housekeeping staff was matched only by his particular contempt for employees of color. She still remembered their first encounter when she had dared to suggest an improvement to the room cleaning rotation schedule. "I don't recall asking for input from the help," he had said, not bothering to lower his voice as other executives chuckled. That day had taught her to keep her suggestions, her education, and her languages to herself. The executive floor was buzzing with unusual energy as Jasmine quietly entered to clean the conference rooms. Snippets of conversation reached her ears as executives huddled in corners, their voices urgent and strained. "The occupancy rates are abysmal. 3rd quarter losses. Might not make payroll next month." Jasmine kept her head down, methodically dusting surfaces while absorbing every word. The hotel was failing financially, that much was clear, yet management continued living lavishly, while staff wages remained frozen for the 3rd consecutive year. The housekeeping break room told a different story than the opulent lobby just beyond its doors. There, during her lunch break, Jasmine listened as Eliza Montgomery, the 40-year-old head of housekeeping and one of the few black employees in a supervisory position, shared the latest rumors. "Word is Mr. Whitmore's job is on the line," Eliza whispered, her experienced eyes constantly checking for eavesdroppers. "The owners are furious about the financial situation." Their conversation halted abruptly as Bradley himself strode into the break room, something he rarely did. His tailored suit and imperious demeanor seemed absurdly out of place among the tired staff in their uniforms. "Attention, everyone," he announced, not bothering with pleasantries. "I have important news. Wei Zhang, the Chinese billionaire, will be visiting next week to discuss potentially purchasing the Grand Palmetto. This could save all your jobs, so I expect everyone to be at their absolute best." After he left, a buzz of nervous excitement filled the room, but Jasmine remained quiet, remembering all too vividly her interview with Bradley 6 months earlier. She had applied for an assistant manager position, her resume carefully detailing her Columbia degree, her fluency in Mandarin, French, and Spanish, and her previous business experience. Bradley had barely glanced at her qualifications before dismissing them with a wave of his hand. "These credentials seem unusual," he had said with a smirk. "Probably inflated, if not fake. We'll keep your application on file." It was the same coded rejection she'd heard too many times before. Later that evening, as Jasmine cleaned the Human Resources office after hours, curiosity and frustration led her to a moment of weakness. With a quick glance at the empty hallway, she accessed the unlocked computer and searched for her own application. There, in the notes section, Bradley had written, "Overeducated potential troublemaker. Find reasons to reject." She had applied for housekeeping the following week, deliberately omitting her advanced degrees and language skills. The very next day, Eliza pulled Jasmine aside after their shift ended. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice low. "When Zhang visits, make yourself invisible." The last educated black woman who caught management's attention was gone within a week. They claimed budget cuts, but we all knew better. Jasmine nodded, but as she left the hotel that evening, she made a detour to the executive floor under the pretense of retrieving a forgotten cleaning tool. In Bradley's unoccupied office, a confidential financial report lay open on his desk. One quick scan told her everything. Bradley was planning to present falsified financial projections to Zhang, hiding the hotel's true, desperate condition. The revelation sent her mind racing with conflicting thoughts of self-preservation and justice. Walking home to her small apartment that night, Jasmine wondered what her parents would advise. Her father, who had worked double shifts as a janitor to help fund her education, had always told her, "Your knowledge is the one thing they can never take from you." But he had never mentioned how that same knowledge could make her a target. The morning of Wei Zhang's arrival transformed the Grand Palmetto Hotel into a theater of anxiety with Bradley Whitmore as its frenetic director. Staff had been working since dawn, polishing every surface to a mirror shine and replacing floral arrangements that were barely a day old. When Zhang's sleek black car pulled up to the entrance at precisely 9 o'clock, everyone held their breath in anticipation of an entourage befitting a man worth over $30 billion. Instead, they watched in surprise as Zhang emerged with just 2 assistants dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored dark blue suit. At 64, Zhang carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove, his silver-streaked hair and observant eyes, giving him an air of distinction without ostentation. Bradley rushed forward with an exaggerated smile, extending his hand in greeting. "Mr. Zhang, welcome to the Grand Palmetto. We are absolutely honored by your presence." Zhang responded with a polite nod and a measured handshake, his eyes already moving past Bradley to take in the historic lobby with its soaring ceilings and antebellum architecture. Jasmine observed the scene from her position near the service elevator, intentionally keeping to the periphery, as Eliza had advised. She couldn't help but notice how Bradley had assembled an entirely white team to handle the Zhang visit, despite several qualified employees of color who normally managed VIP guests. Even Darius Washington, the hotel's most experienced concierge, who spoke conversational Mandarin, had been reassigned to back-office duties for the duration of Zhang's stay. The staff briefing earlier that morning had made the hierarchy painfully clear. Housekeeping was to maintain perfect invisibility, entering rooms only when guests were absent, speaking only when directly addressed, and avoiding eye contact with Zhang or his team. Jasmine had been specifically assigned to clean the penthouse suite, where Zhang would be staying, a task that simultaneously placed her in proximity to the billionaire while emphasizing her subordinate status. Later that afternoon, as Jasmine quietly restocked the bathroom in Zhang's suite, she heard him enter the adjacent room, speaking rapidly in Mandarin on his phone. Years of language study allowed her to understand perfectly as he expressed doubts about the hotel management to someone on the other end of the line. "The property itself is magnificent, but something about the operation feels wrong," Zhang was saying. "The numbers in their preliminary report don't align with industry standards for a hotel of this caliber. Either they're incompetent or deliberately misleading me." Jasmine froze, torn between professional ethics and the natural instinct to listen when one understands a supposedly private conversation. She moved silently, continuing her work while absorbing every word. Zhang continued, "I need to understand the true financial situation before proceeding. The employees seem tense, especially management. That usually indicates problems." When the conversation ended, Jasmine slipped out through the service entrance without being noticed, her mind racing with the implications of what she'd heard. Downstairs, a new complication had arrived in the form of Sophia Chen, a 26-year-old translator hired specifically for the Zhang meetings. Jasmine watched from a distance as Bradley introduced Sophia to the executive team, emphasizing her connections to a prestigious Boston family and her education at elite institutions. What became immediately clear to Jasmine, however, was that Sophia's Mandarin was rudimentary at best. As Sophia exchanged a few basic phrases with one of Zhang's assistants, her pronunciation was so flawed that the assistant had to ask her to repeat herself several times. Yet Bradley seemed oblivious or indifferent to this critical shortcoming, focused instead on Sophia's impressive pedigree, and Jasmine couldn't help but notice her conventionally attractive appearance. The real reason for Sophia's selection became evident later that day when Jasmine, cleaning the adjacent conference room, overheard Bradley coaching her on the upcoming financial presentation. "When we discuss occupancy rates, translate the figures exactly as I present them," he instructed. "But when he asks about operating costs or revenue projections, use these alternate numbers instead." He slid a paper across the table. "The actual figures might scare him off. We need this deal to go through." Sophia looked uncomfortable but nodded her agreement. "I'll do my best, Mr. Whitmore, but my business Mandarin is somewhat limited." Bradley dismissed her concern with a wave. "Just stick to the script. Zhang's people will be focused on me anyway." That evening, while Jasmine was refreshing the towels in Zhang's bathroom, the billionaire unexpectedly returned to his suite. Coming face to face with him in the living area, Jasmine immediately lowered her eyes and turned to leave. Wei Zhang said in English, his accent noticeable, but his command of the language quite good. "What is your name?" Surprised by the direct address, Jasmine responded quietly, "Jasmine Johnson, sir." "Thank you for keeping everything so immaculate," Jasmine Zhang said with genuine appreciation. Before she could respond, Bradley appeared at the door, apparently having escorted Zhang upstairs. His face darkened, seeing Jasmine conversing directly with their important guest. "I apologize for the intrusion," Mr. Zhang, Bradley said sharply. "The housekeeping staff knows better than to disturb our guests." He glared at Jasmine. "That will be all." The dismissal was unmistakable, and Jasmine quickly gathered her supplies, feeling the sting of humiliation, as Bradley continued, "Our housekeeping staff should remain invisible. I'll ensure this doesn't happen again." As she exited, she heard Zhang say something that sounded like mild disagreement, but Bradley was already loudly launching into details about the dinner scheduled for that evening. Back in the staff area, Jasmine checked her phone to find 3 missed calls from her brother Marcus. When she finally connected with him during her break, his news sent a wave of panic through her. "The student loan company is threatening legal action, Jas," he said, his voice tight with concern. "They're saying you've defaulted on the payments." "That's impossible," Jasmine protested. "I've been making the minimum payments, even with this ridiculous salary." But the truth was, between her drastically reduced income and Charleston's high cost of living, she had fallen behind despite her careful budgeting. "They're talking about garnishing wages, placing liens." "You need to figure something out fast," Marcus warned. The call ended just as Eliza entered the break room, her usually composed face showing signs of stress. "Everyone's jobs are on the line with this Zhang visit," she told Jasmine in a low voice. "I just heard from accounting that if this sale doesn't go through, they're planning immediate staff reductions. Housekeeping will be the first department cut. Every single one of us." The weight of this news settled heavily on Jasmine's shoulders. Her education, once a source of pride and hope, now felt like an anchor dragging her down into debt with no professional lifeline in sight. And now the one job she had managed to secure, despite being grossly overqualified, hung by a thread that Bradley Whitmore seemed determined to cut. The pristine gardens of the Grand Palmetto Hotel stretched behind the main building, a meticulously maintained acre of southern magnolias, azaleas, and carefully trimmed hedges that formed intimate conversation spaces. Jasmine had been assigned to refresh the linens in the garden suites when she rounded a corner and nearly collided with Wei Zhang, who stood alone beside a centuries-old oak tree, appearing frustrated as he attempted to communicate with 2 groundskeepers. "The cypress trees," he was saying in halting English, pointing to several sickly specimens along the property's edge. "Why they die." The groundskeepers, both Latino men who primarily spoke Spanish, shrugged apologetically, unable to bridge the language gap. Without thinking, Jasmine stepped forward. "He's asking about the cypress trees," she explained in Spanish to the gardeners. Then, turning to Zhang, she continued in Mandarin. "They're saying there's been a fungal infection affecting several trees. They've treated them, but some couldn't be saved." Zhang's eyebrows rose in surprise. But before he could respond, Jasmine spotted Bradley marching purposefully across the lawn toward them. Fear flashed through her as she quickly excused herself in English and hurried back toward the building, heart pounding. She could feel Zhang's curious eyes following her retreat. Later that afternoon, while dusting the lobby's antique furnishings, she overheard Bradley fielding questions from Zhang about her. The housekeeper from the garden, Zhang was saying, "She speaks Mandarin very well." Bradley's response was immediate and dismissive. "I doubt that very much, Mr. Zhang. Our housekeeping staff are local hires with basic education. Perhaps she knew a few greeting phrases." The lie rolled smoothly off his tongue. "Our professional translator, Miss Chen, will handle all your communication needs." Zhang looked unconvinced, but didn't press the issue. That evening, Bradley assembled the staff to announce an important dinner meeting scheduled for the following night. "Mr. Zhang will be hosting several potential investors," he explained, his gaze sweeping over the assembled employees with particular sharpness when it reached the housekeeping team. "Select staff will serve the meal. You will be silent, efficient, and completely unobtrusive. Any disruption could jeopardize the entire deal." Jasmine was assigned to the service team, a position that would place her in the room during crucial negotiations while reinforcing her subordinate status. As she prepared place settings in the private dining room the next morning, she overheard Zhang speaking to his assistant in Mandarin near the doorway, unaware of her presence behind a decorative screen. "The hotel location is perfect," Zhang was saying, "but I'm considering converting the entire property to luxury condominiums. The hotel business model here seems fundamentally broken." His assistant nodded. "The staffing costs could be eliminated almost entirely. Construction could begin within months of acquisition." Jasmine nearly dropped the crystal glass she was polishing. Condominiums would mean the elimination of not just some jobs, but virtually all of them. The hotel's 300 employees would be reduced to a handful of maintenance workers during the transition, then nothing. She slipped out through the service entrance, mind racing. That afternoon, while collecting linens from the executive floor, she noticed Bradley meeting privately with several department heads, his office door slightly ajar. "The condominium conversion is our ace in the hole," he was saying, his voice animated with unusual enthusiasm. "Zhang doesn't realize I've been advocating for this approach from the beginning. When the deal closes, all executive positions will transition to the development company. The rest of the staff becomes redundant, but that's business." Jasmine felt physically ill as the pieces clicked into place. Bradley wasn't fighting to save the hotel and its staff. He was orchestrating their elimination while securing his own future. The memories of her previous corporate job crashed back like a tidal wave. 2 years ago, she had been working as a junior financial analyst at a prestigious firm in Atlanta. During a client presentation, she had noticed a critical error in the calculations her boss had prepared. Following proper protocol, she had discreetly alerted him during a break. Rather than appreciating the save, he had publicly accused her of attempting to undermine him, and within a week she was terminated for not being a cultural fit. The real message had been clear. Black women who displayed competence, especially when it highlighted others' mistakes, became targets. As she continued her housekeeping rounds, Jasmine noticed increasing hostility from certain staff members, particularly white employees who had observed Zhang's interest in her. Whispers followed her through the corridors. Getting above herself, trying to catch the boss's attention, should remember her place. Even some who had previously been friendly now kept their distance, as though her visibility might contaminate them by association. The tension reached a new level when she was assigned to clean Bradley's office late that evening after everyone had departed. A folder marked confidential. Hiring records had been left carelessly on his desk. Jasmine knew she should ignore it, but the memory of her own rejected application pushed her forward. Inside, she discovered something that stopped her breath. Dozens of rejected applications from highly qualified black candidates for management positions, each marked with similar comments. Not a cultural fit, overqualified potential attitude. Problems find objective reasons to reject. The systematic discrimination was meticulously documented in Bradley's own handwriting. What would you do if you discovered your boss was not only discriminating, but planning to eliminate hundreds of jobs while pretending to save them? Comment number 1. If you believe Jasmine should speak up immediately regardless of the co-primate. Consequences. Comment number 2. If you think she should remain silent to protect her job. Hit that like button if you've ever had to hide your true qualifications to get a job, and subscribe for more stories about people fighting against workplace discrimination. The dinner meeting was set to begin in just 24 hours. Would Jasmine find the courage to use her hidden talents, or would fear keep her silent as she had been so many times before? The preliminary negotiations that afternoon provided a troubling preview when Sophia Chen catastrophically mistranslated a key question from Zhang about the hotel's debt structure. Jasmine, delivering water to the conference room, recognized the error immediately, but remained silent, remembering all too vividly the consequences of appearing too knowledgeable. As she left the room, she caught Zhang watching her with an intensity that suggested he might be connecting the dots about her understanding. The weight of 300 jobs now hung in the balance, with Bradley Whitmore holding scissors to the thread. A sleek black Bentley pulled into the circular driveway of the Grand Palmetto Hotel, announcing the arrival of Victor Reynolds, the 55-year-old white owner whose family had controlled the property for 4 generations. Staff members straightened their postures and plastered on welcoming smiles, but Jasmine detected an undercurrent of genuine fear rippling through the ranks. Unlike Bradley, who masked his prejudice behind corporate jargon and policy, Victor was known for his unfiltered comments and barely concealed contempt for staff members of color. The last time he had visited 3 black employees had been terminated the following week for infractions so minor that they would have earned white staff members nothing more than a verbal warning. Jasmine was midway through preparing a suite on the 4th floor when her radio crackled with Eliza's voice. Jasmine, report to maintenance immediately for reassignment. The cryptic message became clear when Jasmine arrived at the dingy maintenance office in the hotel's basement. Direct orders from Mr. Whitmore, the maintenance supervisor, said without meeting her eyes. You're reassigned to bathroom detail for the duration of the owner's visit. The implied humiliation was unmistakable. While other housekeepers would continue their regular duties in the guest rooms and public spaces, Jasmine alone would be confined to cleaning toilets and scrubbing showers, kept as far as possible from important meetings and visibility. She accepted the reassignment with outward calm, but inwardly her resentment burned like acid. The basement level of the hotel housed not only maintenance, but also the complex network of ventilation ducts that served the entire building. As Jasmine methodically cleaned the staff bathrooms, she became aware of voices carrying clearly through a vent connected to the executive conference room directly above. Bradley and Victor were having what they believed was a private conversation. The Columbia Ph.D. housekeeper Victor was saying with a chuckle, "Do you actually believe that nonsense? Probably some online degree mill." Bradley's responding laugh held a note of cruelty. "I checked her references after Zhang mentioned her. Columbia confirms she attended, but you know how these diversity admissions work. Standards lowered, special considerations. Probably couldn't hack it in a real business environment. Keep her away from Zhang," Victor ordered. "Last thing we need is some affirmative action case trying to insert herself into negotiations. The Chinese are impressionable about these things." Jasmine's hands shook as she continued scrubbing her knuckles, whitening around the brush. Every fiber of her being wanted to storm upstairs and confront them with her transcript, her honors thesis, her academic publications. Instead, she channeled her fury into the menial task before her, knowing that revealing herself now would only result in immediate termination. The hotel buzzed with activity as final preparations for the critical negotiation took place. Zhang had brought in additional financial advisors, and investment bankers from New York had arrived to evaluate the deal. Amid this controlled chaos, crisis struck without warning. Zhang's personal assistant and primary translator, a composed man named Lin who had been managing most of the direct communications, suddenly collapsed in the hotel lobby. Medical staff diagnosed a severe case of food poisoning, requiring immediate hospitalization, leaving Zhang without his most trusted intermediary for the decisive meeting scheduled that evening. Bradley scrambled to manage the situation, placing his hopes on Sophia Chen despite her obvious limitations. Jasmine watched from the shadows as Sophia was hurriedly briefed on complex financial terminology she clearly didn't understand. The tension reached breaking point during an emergency meeting where Sophia completely mistranslated Zhang's concerns about the hotel's competitive positioning, turning his pointed questions about market saturation into vague comments about the weather. Zhang's frustration became increasingly evident as he switched to English, his limited fluency still better than the mangled translations he was receiving. "Perhaps we postpone," he suggested, checking his watch, "until proper translator available." Panic flashed across Bradley's face at the prospect of delay. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Zhang. Sophia is more than capable, just a bit nervous." He turned to Sophia with a threatening glare that promised consequences if she failed. "Right, Sophia?" She nodded miserably, clearly out of her depth. Bradley excused himself and immediately began working the phones in the adjacent office, calling translation agencies throughout Charleston with increasing desperation. $5,000. For a Mandarin translator available immediately, Jasmine overheard him, offering only to be repeatedly told that no qualified professionals were available on such short notice. The stakes elevated further when Jasmine's friend Trevor, one of the few black bellmen at the hotel, was abruptly fired that afternoon. His offense delivering luggage to Zhang's suite 5 minutes later than requested, because he had been assisting an elderly guest who had fallen in the lobby. "Example has to be set," Bradley told the shocked front desk staff. "Mr. Reynolds wants perfection during this visit." The message was unmistakable. Black employees were expendable, their jobs hanging by the thinnest of threads. As preparations for the crucial evening meeting continued, Bradley gathered the service staff to deliver final instructions. "The occupancy numbers I present will show 87% capacity for the past quarter," he informed them. "If anyone questions this, it's correct. The health code violations from last month never happened. The kitchen renovation was completed under budget." "Is that clear?" The staff nodded silently, participants in a deception that had become routine. Jasmine slipped away from the briefing and sought out Eliza in the housekeeping office. She found the older woman updating the staff schedule, her experienced face lined with worry. "I need to talk to you," Jasmine said quietly, closing the door behind her. "I've been thinking about the translator situation." Eliza looked up sharply. "Don't even consider it, Jasmine. You reveal your Mandarin skills now, you might as well pack your belongings." "But the condominium conversion plan," Jasmine pressed. "I overheard Zhang discussing it. If the deal goes through, as Bradley wants, everyone loses their jobs anyway." Eliza's eyes widened at this new information. "Are you certain?" Jasmine nodded grimly. 300 people, Eliza. All unemployed within months, while Bradley and the executives transitioned to the development company. Eliza sat back, the full weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. "What are you proposing?" "A dangerous gamble," Jasmine admitted, "but possibly our only chance." The grand ballroom of the Grand Palmetto Hotel had been transformed for the decisive negotiation, its 19th-century opulence, providing a fitting backdrop for decisions that would determine the fate of hundreds. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gleaming mahogany table where 14 leather chairs awaited the key participants, Bradley Whitmore, and 4 hotel executives, Wei Zhang, and 3 members of his team, Victor Reynolds, representing ownership, and 4 potential investors whose capital would facilitate the transition. Jasmine and 5 other staff members in crisp white uniforms stood against the wall, like living decorations selected to serve refreshments silently throughout the proceedings. Eliza had given Jasmine a final warning before she entered the ballroom. "Whatever you're planning, be certain. There's no going back once you cross that line." Bradley stood at the head of the table, his confidence seemingly restored as he distributed leather portfolios containing the presentation materials. "Gentlemen, welcome to what I believe will be a historic evening for the Grand Palmetto." He began, his practiced charm on full display. "Mr. Zhang, we are particularly honored by your interest in our property." Sophia Chen sat nervously beside Zhang, notepad ready as Bradley launched into his presentation. The financial projections displayed on the screen were masterpieces of creative accounting, transforming 3 consecutive quarters of losses into a narrative of strategic reinvestment and projected growth. Occupancy rates that had actually hovered around 58% were presented as consistently above 85%. Deferred maintenance issues costing millions were completely omitted. Jasmine watched Zhang's face carefully as she moved silently around the table, refilling water glasses. The billionaire's expression remained impassive, offering no hint of his thoughts, but his questions became increasingly specific, targeting precisely the areas where Bradley's presentation was weakest. "Please explain again," Zhang requested through Sophia, "the discrepancy between staffing costs and industry standards for luxury properties of this size." Bradley smoothly attributed the difference to our unique service model and staff retention programs, a fiction so bold that Jasmine nearly dropped the water pitcher. The reality which Bradley conveniently omitted was systematic understaffing that had forced remaining employees to shoulder impossible workloads. As the presentation progressed, Sophia's limitations became painfully apparent. Zhang began speaking in increasingly complex Mandarin, using financial terminology and idiomatic expressions that left her visibly struggling. Her translations became fragmented and delayed, turning Zhang's incisive questions into vague approximations that Bradley could easily deflect. The frustration in the room was palpable as communication deteriorated. Finally, after a particularly mangled translation, Zhang began speaking rapidly in Mandarin directly to his team, bypassing Sophia entirely. Jasmine, positioned directly behind them while serving coffee, understood every word with perfect clarity. "This is becoming pointless," Zhang was saying. "The numbers don't align with the market research my team conducted. I believe they are intentionally misleading us about the property's financial health." One of his advisors nodded. "The maintenance issues are obvious to anyone who looks carefully. The structural problems in the East Wing alone would require millions to address." Zhang continued, his tone growing more decisive. "I'm terminating negotiations. The renovation costs would far exceed their projections, and I have no interest in becoming entangled in what appears to be years of mismanagement. We'll inform them that we're considering other properties and exit gracefully." "What about the condominium conversion possibility?" his advisor asked. "Not worth the complications," Zhang replied. "The zoning issues alone would create delays, and the staff situation would generate negative publicity. I'm no longer interested in acquiring this property in any capacity." As Zhang spoke these final words, Jasmine, in the process of pouring coffee for an investor, felt a jolt of panic surge through her body. The pot trembled in her hand, and before she could steady herself, it slipped, sending the entire silver coffee service crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering porcelain shattered the tension-filled atmosphere. All eyes turned to her as coffee spread across the pristine carpet. "I am so sorry," she gasped in perfect Mandarin, instinctively responding in the language she had just been processing. "Please forgive my clumsiness." The room froze. Zhang stared at her with undisguised shock, while Bradley's face drained of all color. The silence that followed felt eternal, until Zhang broke it by addressing her directly in rapid Mandarin. "You understand what we've been discussing?" he asked, his eyes sharp with sudden interest. Before Jasmine could respond, Bradley was on his feet, his voice tight, with barely controlled fury. "Please excuse this interruption, gentlemen. This staff member will be removed immediately." He gestured sharply toward a security officer positioned by the door. Zhang held up his hand. "No, I wish her to stay." Bradley's professional smile faltered. "Mr. Zhang, this is highly irregular. She has disrupted our meeting and clearly made you uncomfortable with her presumption." "On the contrary," Zhang replied in English, "I find this development most interesting." He switched back to Mandarin, addressing Jasmine directly. "Do you truly understand what we were discussing about the hotel's financial situation?" The room held its breath as Jasmine stood at the crossroads of safety and truth. 300 jobs hung in the balance. Her own future, the systematic discrimination she had documented, all coming down to this moment of decision. "Yes, sir," she answered in Mandarin, as clear and fluent as his own. "I understand everything." The ballroom of the Grand Palmetto Hotel became a tableau of frozen expressions as Jasmine's fluent Mandarin hung in the air. Bradley Whitmore recovered first, his face flushing from pale shock to angry red. "Security," he snapped, pointing at Jasmine. Remove this employee immediately. Two uniformed men moved toward her, but Wei Zhang stood raising his hand in a gesture that stopped them instantly. "That will not be necessary," he said in English, his authority unquestionable, despite his calm tone. "I wish to speak with this young woman." Bradley stepped forward, his professional veneer cracking under pressure. "Mr. Nsem, Zhang must insist. This is completely inappropriate. She is merely housekeeping staff who has clearly overstepped her boundaries." Zhang ignored him, focusing entirely on Jasmine. In Mandarin, he continued, "You spoke without thinking when you dropped the tray. Your accent is regional. Jiangsu province, perhaps. Your command of idioms suggests academic training, not merely conversational fluency." Jasmine swallowed hard, aware that every eye in the room was fixed upon her. In Mandarin, she responded, "I apologize for speaking out of turn, sir. I was educated at Columbia University, where I specialized in international business with a focus on Chinese-American commercial relations. My concern is for the 300 employees whose livelihoods depend on this hotel's continuation." Bradley attempted to interject, but Zhang silenced him with a glance. "Columbia University," Zhang repeated thoughtfully. "Yet you work as housekeeping staff. This requires explanation." "Perhaps we should continue with our scheduled agenda," Bradley insisted, desperation evident in his voice. "This domestic matter can be handled separately." "This is now my agenda," Zhang stated firmly, switching to English so everyone understood. "I find myself curious why someone with such exceptional skills would be employed in a position that does not utilize them." He turned back to Jasmine, reverting to Mandarin. "Please continue." Taking a deep breath, Jasmine spoke carefully in Mandarin. "The devaluation of education and experience is unfortunately common for people who look like me in this industry. I applied for management positions repeatedly, but was rejected despite my qualifications. Eventually, financial necessity required me to accept whatever position was available." Zhang nodded thoughtfully, then proceeded to test her knowledge. "Tell me, what would be the implications of an asset-based valuation approach versus a revenue multiple for this property?" Without hesitation, Jasmine launched into a sophisticated analysis of valuation methodologies specific to the 7-brided valuation. Luxury hotel industry, explaining how asset-based approaches might overvalue the Grand Palmetto given its historical significance, but undervalue its potential given current management limitations. Her explanation incorporated Chinese investment patterns in American hospitality properties and current market trends. The room remained silent as she spoke, her expertise undeniable. When she finished, Zhang smiled slightly and turned to his advisors. "Her business Mandarin is better than many of our domestic executives," he remarked. Bradley stepped forward, a new strategy forming. "Mr. Zhang, if I may, it appears we've had a misunderstanding about Miss Johnson's capabilities. Perhaps this speaks to our Human Resources Department's need for improvement. However, the fact remains that she misrepresented herself during the hiring process." Jasmine met his accusation directly. "I did not misrepresent myself, Mr. Whitmore. I submitted a complete and accurate resume for the assistant manager position which detailed my education and language skills. Only after being rejected for that position did I submit a simplified application for housekeeping, omitting qualifications that had been deemed threatening or irrelevant." Zhang's interest visibly deepened. "May I ask why you believe your qualifications were seen as threatening?" "Because my application for management included notes that I was overeducated and a potential troublemaker," Jasmine replied evenly. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed someone being completely underestimated because of their appearance. What would you do if you had a hidden talent that could save hundreds of jobs? Let's find out what happened when one woman's voice finally broke through the silence. In fact, I request that she participate directly in our discussions moving forward. Victor Reynolds, who had remained ominously silent until now, finally spoke. "Mr. Zhang, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. Miss Johnson is not authorized to represent the Grand Palmetto in any capacity." "Then consider this a condition of my continued interest," Zhang replied smoothly. "I prefer to negotiate with those who speak truthfully in whatever language is being used." The power dynamic in the room shifted visibly as Bradley and Victor exchanged alarmed glances. One of the investors leaned forward, intrigued by the unfolding drama. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess to reorganize," he suggested. "Say 20 minutes. Zhang nodded his agreement, and as the room began to clear, he approached Jasmine directly. "You have taken a significant risk today," he said quietly in Mandarin. "Why?" The question hung between them, deceptively simple yet profound. Jasmine thought of her father working double shifts, her mother postponing medical treatments to help pay for textbooks, her brother's unwavering belief in her potential. She thought of Eliza Trevor and countless others, trapped in a system designed to undervalue them. "Because some things matter more than personal safety," she answered. 300 families depend on this hotel. They deserve better than deception. The pattern of rejection for qualified applicants of color is well documented in Mr. Whitmore's own records. Bradley's face contorted with anger. These are baseless accusations from a disgruntled employee trying to create a scene. "Mr. Zhang, I apologize for this disruption." Zhang waved away the apology, his focus unwavering. "Miss Johnson will remain for the duration of our negotiations," he declared, switching to English so his decision was clear to everyone. For the first time in 18 months, she had stood in her full identity, unleashing capabilities kept carefully hidden. The feeling terrifying as it was tasted remarkably like freedom. Have you ever had to make a choice between staying silent for safety or speaking up for justice? Comment number 1. If you faced a moment where revealing your true capabilities meant risking everything. Comment number 2. If you believe the system will never change unless people like Jasmine take these risks. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see more stories about people who refuse to be underestimated. The question now hanging in the balance, would Jasmine's revelation be enough to change the outcome for everyone at the Grand Palmetto, or had she sacrificed herself for nothing? As Bradley stormed back into the room, personnel file in hand, the real battle was clearly just beginning. The atmosphere in the grand ballroom had transformed entirely when negotiations resumed 20 minutes later. Jasmine now sat at the table between Wei Zhang and his financial advisor, her housekeeping uniform standing in stark contrast to the bespoke suits surrounding her. Bradley Whitmore had spent the break in frantic consultation with Victor Reynolds and the hotel's legal counsel, their hushed but heated exchanges visible through the glass walls of the adjacent conference room. When they returned, Bradley carried a thin folder that he placed meaningfully before him, his composure partially restored, but a vein still pulsing visibly at his temple. Zhang opened the reconvened meeting with characteristic directness. "Miss Johnson will now properly translate the concerns I expressed earlier regarding the financial presentation," he stated, looking expectantly at Jasmine. With all eyes upon her, Jasmine straightened her shoulders and addressed the room in clear, professional English. "Mr. Zhang has expressed significant reservations about the financial projections presented today. His team's independent research indicates occupancy rates approximately 30 percentage points lower than the figures shown in your presentation. Additionally, he believes the deferred maintenance costs have been substantially underrepresented, particularly regarding the structural issues in the East Wing and the outdated HVAC systems throughout the property." Bradley interjected immediately. "These figures are taken directly from our quarterly reports. I can assure Mr. Zhang that they are accurate." "Perhaps by your accounting methods," Jasmine translated as Zhang responded. "But our analysis of public reviews, booking platforms, and industry comparables tells a different story. This property has been declining in performance for 3 consecutive years, while comparable luxury hotels in Charleston have seen increases." With each accurately translated exchange, the power dynamic continued to shift. Zhang's questions became more pointed, targeting precisely the areas where Bradley's presentation had been most misleading. Jasmine translated flawlessly, her financial vocabulary as sophisticated as her cultural awareness, allowing Zhang to fully articulate concerns that had previously been blunted by inadequate translation. The maintenance issues alone would require an additional investment of $12 to $15 million beyond the purchase price, Zhang stated through Jasmine. "This significantly impacts the valuation model we are willing to consider." As the true financial picture emerged, several of the potential investors exchanged troubled glances. One pulled out his phone and began quietly texting, presumably updating partners about the deteriorating prospects. Bradley attempted repeatedly to redirect the conversation back to his prepared talking points, but Zhang consistently returned to the discrepancies between presentation and reality. Finally, with visible reluctance, Bradley acknowledged, "There may be some areas where our projections are more optimistic than current trends might suggest." "Optimistic is a diplomatic choice of words," Zhang replied through Jasmine. "I knew something was amiss, but without accurate translation, I couldn't pinpoint the specific issues. Now I understand why my concerns about staff turnover and customer satisfaction metrics were mysteriously transformed into comments about the weather and local attractions." At this, Victor Reynolds finally lost his composure. "This is outrageous," he snapped, slapping his palm against the polished table. "We are a historically significant property with an impeccable reputation. These accusations of misrepresentation are offensive and potentially libelous." Zhang remained unperturbed. "Facts are neither offensive nor libelous, Mr. Reynolds. They are simply facts. The question now is whether there is a path forward given what we now understand about the property's true condition." He turned to Jasmine. "Miss Johnson, as someone who apparently understands both the operational reality and the financial reporting, what is your assessment of this situation?" The question caught her by surprise, but she recovered quickly. "The Grand Palmetto has substantial, unrealized potential that has been compromised by management decisions prioritizing short-term profit extraction over sustainable operations. Staff reductions have damaged service quality, deferred maintenance has accelerated property deterioration, and marketing has relied on historical reputation rather than addressing current market demands." Her assessment, delivered with professional confidence rather than the deferential tone expected from housekeeping staff, visibly infuriated Bradley. "This is absurd," he interjected. "We're taking business advice from a housekeeper now." Zhang's expression hardened. "We are taking advice from someone who clearly understands both business principles and the operational reality of this property. A perspective your team has notably failed to provide." Bradley seized the moment to play what he clearly considered his trump card, opening the folder before him. "Then perhaps we should examine Miss Johnson's credentials more thoroughly," he said with barely concealed satisfaction. "Her employment application for the housekeeping position makes no mention of advanced degrees or language skills. This deliberate omission constitutes fraudulent misrepresentation during the hiring process." Jasmine met his gaze steadily. "As I mentioned earlier, this application was submitted after my fully qualified application for management was rejected, despite meeting all stated requirements. I have documentation of both applications." One of Zhang's advisors whispered something to him, and the billionaire nodded before addressing the room. "I find myself curious about Miss Johnson's personnel file." "May we see it?" Bradley hesitated, clearly calculating the implications. Victor Reynolds interjected. "Personnel files are confidential. This would be highly irregular. So is discovering that a PhD in international business from an Ivy League institution is cleaning toilets in your establishment," Zhang countered smoothly. "I believe transparency would benefit everyone at this juncture." After a tense standoff, Bradley reluctantly pushed a button on the conference room phone. "Janet, bring Jasmine Johnson's complete personnel file immediately. All applications, all notes." The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. 10 minutes later, a nervous human resources assistant entered with a thick folder that she placed before Bradley. He opened it, his expression darkening as he scanned the contents. Zhang extended his hand. "May I?" Reluctantly, Bradley passed the file across the table. Zhang and his advisors reviewed it carefully, occasionally asking Jasmine to clarify specific points. Finally, Zhang looked up, his gaze traveling slowly around the table before settling on Bradley. "Miss Johnson's original application shows qualifications that would place her among the most educated and skilled employees in your organization. Her credentials are verified by prestigious institutions. Her recommendations are exemplary. Yet she was rejected for multiple management positions while candidates with significantly less impressive qualifications were hired. "Can you explain this pattern?" Bradley shifted uncomfortably. Hiring decisions involve many factors beyond paper qualifications. Cultural fit, leadership qualities, interpersonal dynamics. Wei Zhang interrupted, the single word falling into the room like a stone. Bradley flushed. "That is an offensive suggestion. The Grand Palmetto is an equal opportunity employer. We value diversity." "Yet your management team appears remarkably homogeneous," Zhang observed. "And according to these notes in Miss Art Johnson's file, her rejection was recommended because she was, and I quote, overeducated and unlikely to accept proper authority." Victor Reynolds leaned forward, his face flushed with anger. "Mr. Zhang, if you're no longer interested in acquiring our property, we can end these discussions now. But I won't sit here and be lectured about our hiring practices by someone unfamiliar with the local business environment." "On the contrary," Zhang replied calmly, "I remain interested in the Grand Palmetto, but perhaps not in the configuration or under the management structure currently in place." This statement sent a ripple of surprise around the table. "What exactly are you proposing?" Victor asked cautiously. Zhang smiled slightly. "A different approach entirely. One that might address the actual issues, rather than continuing to apply cosmetic solutions to structural problems." As the meeting continued into the evening, Jasmine found herself increasingly involved in the substantive discussions, her knowledge of the hotel's operations proving invaluable, as Zhang explored alternative approaches to the problem. Acquisition. Bradley watched with poorly disguised hostility as his authority and expertise were repeatedly challenged by the very woman he had confined to cleaning bathrooms that morning. By the time the session adjourned for the night, the original deal structure had been completely abandoned and a new framework was taking shape. One that might still save the Grand Palmetto, but almost certainly not with Bradley Whitmore at its helm. As the participants gathered their materials to leave, Bradley approached Jasmine with a whispered threat. "Enjoy your moment. By tomorrow morning, I'll have documentation of every minor infraction you've committed since joining the housekeeping staff. This little performance may have impressed Zhang, but you'll never work in hospitality again after I'm finished with you." Jasmine met his gaze calmly. "Perhaps we should discuss the hiring records I found in your office instead, Mr. Whitmore. The ones showing systematic rejection of qualified applicants of color across all departments. I believe the term for that is actionable evidence." Bradley's expression confirmed she had hit her mark. He retreated without another word, but Jasmine harbored no illusions about the battle that still lay ahead. The walls of discrimination didn't crumble in a single day, no matter how dramatic the revelation. As she left the ballroom, she caught Wei Zhang watching her thoughtfully. "Tomorrow will be interesting, Miss Johnson," he said simply. It was she reflected quite possibly the understatement of the year. Morning light streamed through the tall windows of the Grand Palmetto's executive boardroom, illuminating a scene that would have been unimaginable 24 hours earlier. Jasmine Johnson sat not along the wall in a housekeeping uniform, but at the mahogany table in borrowed business attire, hastily procured by Eliza from her church's professional clothing donation program. The navy blue suit was slightly too large, but Jasmine wore it with the quiet dignity that had become her signature. Wei Zhang sat at the head of the table, flanked by his advisors. Victor Reynolds occupied the opposite end, his expression, a carefully maintained neutral that failed to hide his discomfort. Bradley Whitmore had strategically positioned himself midway down the table, attempting to project relevance, despite his visibly diminished authority. The potential investors from the previous evening had returned, joined now by additional financial representatives who had flown in overnight, intrigued by Zhang's unexpected change of approach. Zhang opened the session with characteristic efficiency. Yesterday revealed significant discrepancies between presentation and reality regarding the Grand Palmetto. Today we will determine whether a path forward exists, based on accurate information and transparent intentions. He nodded toward Jasmine. Miss Johnson will continue to assist with translation and provide operational insights as needed. Bradley immediately attempted to reassert control. Before we proceed, I've taken the liberty of preparing a revised financial presentation addressing the concerns raised yesterday. My team worked through the night to recalibrate our projections based on the most conservative metrics. He began distributing folders with the Grand Palmetto logo embossed in gold. Zhang accepted his copy but set it aside unopened. I appreciate the effort, Mr. Whitmore, but I believe we've moved beyond presentations. Today, I would like to discuss structural changes to both the property and its management approach. Bradley's smile faltered. Of course, we're open to suggestions, but as the current general manager with 15 years of experience in luxury hospitality, I should emphasize that any significant operational changes would require careful implementation under experienced leadership. The implication was clear: he considered himself indispensable, regardless of past misrepresentations. Zhang turned to Jasmine. Miss Johnson, based on your observations from within the organization, what do you consider the most significant operational inefficiencies at the Grand Palmetto? All eyes turned to her, the pressure palpable. Bradley's expression telegraphed clear warning, while Victor Reynolds watched with barely disguised skepticism. Jasmine drew on her academic training and daily observations, presenting a comprehensive analysis of staffing imbalances, outdated technological systems, and misaligned incentive structures that had created bottlenecks throughout the user-friendly property. The current approach treats frontline staff as disposable while maintaining top-heavy management that adds cost without corresponding value, she concluded. The result is declining service quality despite rising labor expenses. One of the investors leaned forward, clearly impressed. You've identified systemic issues that typically require months of external consultation to uncover. How would you address them? The question elevated Jasmine from translator to participant, a shift that visibly irritated Bradley. Before he could interject, she outlined a three-phase restructuring approach that would preserve most staff positions while significantly reducing executive overhead costs. Her proposal included implementing modern inventory management systems, revising housekeeping workflows based on actual usage patterns rather than arbitrary schedules, and realigning compensation structures to reward efficiency and guest satisfaction rather than cost-cutting measures that damage the guest experience. As she spoke, Zhang nodded approvingly while his advisors took detailed notes. Victor Reynolds, initially dismissive, gradually showed signs of reluctant interest as the financial implications became clear. Bradley, however, grew increasingly agitated. These suggestions demonstrate a fundamental misunderstanding of luxury hospitality, he interjected when Jasmine paused. Our guests expect traditional service models. Innovation is important, but not at the expense of the established expectations of our clientele. Zhang regarded him thoughtfully. Interesting perspective, Mr. Whitmore. Yet the property's declining occupancy and guest satisfaction metrics suggest the current approach is failing to meet those very expectations. He turned to his financial advisor. What impact would Miss Johnson's proposed operational changes have on the valuation model? The advisor presented revised projections, showing significantly improved cash flow potential if the recommended changes were implemented. Based on these numbers, he concluded we could justify a purchase price 20% higher than our initial offer, assuming new management implementation. The emphasis on new management hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Bradley's face flushed as he recognized the direct threat to his position. Any management transition would create unacceptable disruption, he argued. The institutional knowledge I bring is irreplaceable. Mr. Zhang, while I appreciate Ms. Johnson's academic perspective, luxury hospitality requires practical experience that cannot be learned from textbooks. Jasmine remained calm as she responded. My analysis isn't purely academic, Mr. Whitmore. It's informed by direct observation of how your management practices affect both guest experience and staff performance. The housekeeping department sees everything from maintenance issues that never reach the official reports to guest complaints that disappear from the feedback system. One of Zhang's advisors, a woman who had been quietly observant until now, addressed Jasmine directly. You mentioned earlier that you had suggested an improved room cleaning rotation that was dismissed. Could you elaborate on that approach and its potential impact? Jasmine outlined a sophisticated allocation model that would redistribute housekeeping resources based on actual room usage patterns rather than arbitrary assignments, potentially reducing labor costs while improving cleanliness scores. The explanation showcased her ability to translate academic knowledge into practical applications, further undermining Bradley's dismissal of her capabilities. As the morning progressed, the discussion evolved from whether Zhang would purchase the hotel to how the transaction would be structured and who would lead the property afterward. Bradley made increasingly desperate attempts to position himself within the new vision, but each contribution revealed his fundamental attachment to the problematic approaches that had created the current situation. During a mid-morning break, Victor Reynolds pulled Jasmine aside, his manner surprisingly conciliatory. "You've made quite an impression on Zhang," he acknowledged grudgingly. "He seems determined to have you involved moving forward." Jasmine maintained her professional demeanor despite her surprise at this apparent olive branch. "My only concern is preserving jobs and revitalizing a historic property that deserves better than its current trajectory." Victor studied her thoughtfully. "Bradley suggested you might have documentation regarding our hiring practices that could be problematic." The question beneath the statement was clear. "My interest isn't in creating problems, Mr. Reynolds," Jasmine replied carefully. "It's in solving them. Equitable hiring practices would be a significant step in that direction." Something shifted in Victor's expression, a reluctant recognition that the power dynamic had fundamentally changed. He nodded once before returning to his seat as the session resumed. The afternoon brought the formal negotiation phase, with attorneys presenting contract language for review and financial terms being finalized. Jasmine continued translating Zhang's more nuanced comments, while contributing substantive suggestions regarding operational transitions. Throughout it all, Bradley became increasingly marginalized. His expertise questioned his projections, discredited by actual performance data. During a particularly tense exchange about management transition plans, Bradley made a final attempt to salvage his position. "While I welcome Ms. Johnson's contributions in an advisory capacity," he said smoothly, "I must emphasize that my contractual relationship with the Grand Palmetto includes significant protections. Any management change would trigger substantial severance obligations that would materially impact the economics of this transaction." Zhang merely smiled slightly before responding. "I factored those costs into our offer price from the beginning, Mr. Whitmore. They represent a worthwhile investment in the property's future success." The statement effectively ended Bradley's relevance to the proceedings. As evening approached and the framework of an agreement took shape, Zhang surprised everyone by addressing a question directly to Jasmine rather than the official hotel representatives. "If this acquisition proceeds, Ms. Johnson, what role would you envision for yourself in the revitalized Grand Palmetto?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning to her. Bradley's expression was thunderous, while Victor Reynolds watched with calculating interest. Jasmine considered the question, carefully aware of its life-changing implications. "I would welcome the opportunity to implement the strategies we've discussed today," she answered. "Whether that's in an operational role or as a transitional consultant would depend on the specific needs of the new ownership structure." Zhang nodded, satisfied with her measured response. "We'll discuss specifics tomorrow," he said, effectively ending the session. As the participants gathered their materials to leave, Bradley approached Jasmine with a final, desperate attempt at intimidation. "This isn't over," he muttered. "I've documented every second you spent away from your assigned duties today. Termination for cause eliminates any chance of unemployment benefits, and I'll personally ensure no hotel in Charleston will touch your resume." Jasmine maintained her composure, but before she could respond, Zhang appeared beside them, apparently having overheard the exchange. "Mr. Whitmore," he said pleasantly, "I've been meaning to discuss your own future. Perhaps we could have breakfast tomorrow to explore your options. 7 a.m. would be convenient for me." The invitation was phrased as a request, but delivered with the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to compliance. Bradley managed a tight smile. "Of course, Mr. Zhang. I look forward to it." As he walked away, Jasmine caught the calculating expression on his face. She had no illusions about what the night would bring. Bradley Whitmore would not surrender his position without deploying every weapon in his considerable arsenal. The question was whether her truth would prove stronger than his desperate final plays. 6 months after the dramatic negotiation that transformed the Grand Palmetto Hotel, Jasmine Johnson stood in the newly renovated lobby watching, as guests checked in under the gleaming crystal chandelier that had been meticulously restored to its original 19th-century glory. The historic property hummed with renewed energy, its occupancy rates steadily climbing under new management that balanced luxury traditions with modern efficiency. Wei Zhang's acquisition had been finalized within weeks of that fateful meeting, with conditions that had sent shockwaves through Charleston's hospitality community. Chief among them, Jasmine Johnson, would become the new general manager, the first black woman to hold such a position at any luxury hotel in the city's history. The transition had not been smooth. Bradley Whitmore had indeed spent his final night at the Grand Palmetto gathering ammunition for what he clearly anticipated would be a devastating counterattack. His breakfast meeting with Zhang had devolved into barely veiled threats about discrimination lawsuits and reputation damage should Jasmine be elevated to management. What Bradley hadn't anticipated was Zhang's meticulous preparation. Before making accusations of discrimination, Zhang had said, calmly sliding a folder across the table, "You might want to review these documents." Inside were copies of every application from qualified candidates of color that Bradley had rejected over 5 years, alongside his handwritten notes documenting his intentional discrimination. There were recordings of his conversations with Victor Reynolds discussing their shared determination to maintain the traditional character of the management team, their coded language transparent in its meaning. Most damaging of all was a comprehensive spreadsheet documenting salary discrepancies between white employees and employees of color, with identical qualifications and responsibilities. "How did you get these?" Bradley had demanded, his face ashen. Zhang had simply smiled. The walls of historic buildings often have eyes and ears in unexpected places. More importantly, Mr. Whitmore, they have people who have been invisible to you, but have seen and heard everything. Bradley's severance package had ultimately included a non-disclosure agreement and a non-disparagement clause, effectively silencing him while removing him permanently from the property's operations. His subsequent attempts to secure comparable positions at other luxury properties had proven unsuccessful, his reputation quietly but thoroughly diminished within the industry. He had eventually accepted a position as assistant manager at a mid-tier business hotel in a neighboring state, a precipitous fall from his former prestige. Victor Reynolds had proven surprisingly adaptable, recognizing which way the wind was blowing. While maintaining his ownership stake, he had stepped back from operational involvement, publicly praising Zhang's vision for bringing the Grand Palmetto into the modern era while honoring its historic significance. Privately sources suggested his cooperation had been secured through financial incentives and the discreet burial of documentation that might have implicated him more directly in discriminatory practices. Jasmine's first official act as general manager had been to review the applications of every qualified candidate previously rejected for discriminatory reasons. Within 30 days, she had rebuilt the management team to reflect both excellence and diversity, bringing in talent that had been systematically excluded. Trevor, the unjustly fired bellman, returned as front office manager, his natural leadership finally recognized and rewarded. Eliza Montgomery was promoted to director of operations, her decades of institutional knowledge finally valued appropriately. The housekeeping department underwent complete restructuring based on Jasmine's efficiency model, resulting in better working conditions, higher pay, and improved cleanliness scores from guests. No positions were eliminated. Instead, staff were redistributed to address previously neglected areas of the property. The revitalized Grand Palmetto quickly became known within the industry as a case study in successful turnaround. Occupancy rates reached 92% within 4 months, breaking all previous records. Revenue per available room increased by 34%. Most tellingly, employee retention improved dramatically, with turnover rates dropping from 48% annually to less than 8%. This afternoon, Jasmine was preparing for a different kind of meeting. Wei Zhang had expanded his investment in Charleston beyond the Grand Palmetto, acquiring 2 additional historic properties in need of revitalization. Based on the success of Jasmine's management approach, he had proposed establishing a hospitality academy specifically designed to identify and develop talented individuals from underrepresented communities. "The talent exists," Zhang had explained when presenting the concept. "What's missing are the pathways and opportunities." With Zhang's funding and Jasmine's educational background, the academy would offer comprehensive training in all aspects of luxury hospitality management, with guaranteed internship placements throughout Zhang's growing portfolio of properties. The announcement had already generated hundreds of applications, creating a pipeline of diverse talent that promised to transform the region's hospitality landscape. As Jasmine reviewed the final curriculum proposal in her office, a notification appeared on her computer screen. Her next appointment had arrived. She smiled, recognizing the name of the applicant she was about to interview for the assistant manager position. Alicia Williams, 28 years old, with a master's degree in hospitality management and 3 languages on her resume, had been rejected by 6 luxury properties despite impeccable qualifications. Her application had been forwarded to Jasmine by a former classmate who recognized the pattern all too well. Rising from her desk, Jasmine straightened her suit jacket and took a moment to appreciate how completely her life had transformed in half a year. From cleaning bathrooms to running one of the most prestigious properties in Charleston. From hiding her education to creating educational opportunities for others. From fearfully concealing her languages to using them as bridges between cultures and opportunities. She thought of her father, who had lived just long enough to see her take this position, his pride bringing tears to eyes that had seen too much struggle and not enough justice. She thought of her mother, now retired and living comfortably, thanks to Jasmine's new salary. She thought of her brother Marcus, inspired by her example to return to college and complete his own long-deferred degree. As Jasmine opened her office door to greet Alicia Williams, she saw herself reflected in the younger woman's nervous determination. "Welcome to the Grand Palmetto," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." The cycle of opportunity continued, breaking the pattern of discrimination. One interview, one hire, one career at a time. The invisible had become visible. The silenced had found their voice. And in that transformation lay the most profound luxury of all, the freedom to be fully, completely oneself. What would you do if you were in Jasmine's position now? Would you focus on building more opportunities for others, or would you take time to enjoy your own success first? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about breaking barriers and creating change. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their education, their talents, and their voice matter no matter how long they've been silenced. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply speak your truth in whatever language it needs to be heard. Jasmine's journey teaches us that our greatest power often lies in what others underestimate about us. When we hide our talents to fit into systems designed to limit us, we not only diminish ourselves, but enable those systems to persist. True transformation requires courage, the willingness to risk comfort and security by standing in our authentic truth. Bradley's discrimination wasn't defeated by matching his tactics, but by Jasmine refusing to remain invisible. The story reminds us that systemic change rarely comes from those benefiting from the current order. It emerges when the undervalued recognize their worth and demand recognition. Wei Zhang's role demonstrates that allies with power can accelerate change, but they can only support what already exists within those fighting for justice. Perhaps most importantly, Jasmine's ultimate victory wasn't simply personal advancement, but creating pathways for others facing similar barriers. Real success isn't measured by individual achievement alone, but by how we transform systems to allow everyone's talents to flourish. In our own lives, we must ask, what talents am I hiding to make others comfortable? What truths am I silencing to maintain false peace? The most profound change begins when we decide our authentic voice matters more than the comfort of those who wish us to remain invisible. Have you ever hidden your talents or education to fit in or avoid making others uncomfortable? Or have you witnessed someone being underestimated because of how they look or where they work? Your story matters, and I'd love to hear it in the comments below. If Jasmine's journey resonated with you, please hit that like button to help more people discover this message. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about breaking barriers and finding your voice in systems designed to silence you. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their education, their skills, and their voice matter sometimes. The person who needs to hear your truth most is the one who never expected you to speak. Thank you for joining me in these conversations about courage, identity, and transformation. Remember, sometimes your most powerful asset is precisely what others have taught you to hide.